Welcome to today's Explainer. There's a real geopolitical mystery quietly unfolding over in the Middle East right now. We're talking about a highly publicized, yet somehow incredibly secretive military maneuver. Egypt has suddenly and completely unprompted deployed military forces to the Gulf. So what's really going on here? Is this just your standard run-of-the-mill training exercise, or are we looking at the quiet positioning of a massive regional shield? The intelligence reports we're diving into today point to a profound regional shift. Honestly, it's the kind of move that could impact global energy markets and completely alter the scale of Middle Eastern warfare. Let's break down exactly what the data reveals.
All right, let's look at our roadmap. We're going to cover the initial sightings at Al-Dhafra base, the broader regional deployment, the specific defense hardware being used, Bahrain's unique situation, the Masafat al-Sikka doctrine, and finally, the huge gap between public perception and government reality. But before we hit our very first stop, I want you to keep this critical question in the back of your mind. Is Egypt preparing for a direct confrontation with Iran? According to recent intelligence and Israeli media reports, Egypt's actions are speaking a completely new language. By openly showing these forces, some analysts actually suggest Egypt is putting its military on an initial collision course with Iran if regional tensions boil over. Make no mistake, this deployment could literally change the region's entire balance. Okay, Section 1. Al-Dhafra base. This is the visible tip of the iceberg, brought to light by President Abdel Fattah el-Sisi and Sheikh Mohammed bin Zayed's highly publicized inspection of Egyptian troops in the UAE. During that visit, a really specific detail was leaked by the BBC. They noted that exactly 13 Egyptian pilots were spotted on the ground. Now, naturally, this immediately raised some eyebrows about the true scale of the Egyptian air wing deployed there. Does 13 pilots automatically mean 13 aircraft? Well, no, not necessarily, but it absolutely confirms that a highly capable, fully operational squadron is sitting right there in the Gulf.
And this detail reveals the brilliant tactical setup we're looking at here. These pilots are flying both single and dual-seat Rafale jets. They're stationed at the Al-Dhafra base, which, if you look at a map, is just 35 kilometers outside the UAE capital of Abu Dhabi. Their main mission? Defending that capital. Plus, they're at a base that already hosts French forces who also operate Rafales. That means seamless integration, shared logistics, and just maximum tactical interoperability. It's a really smart move.
Moving on to Section 2, regional deployment. We've seen the tip of the iceberg in the UAE, but the hidden part underneath is massive.
Intelligence from the tactical report highlights that this entire maneuver is anchored by deep personal trust. They explicitly note that the relationship between the Egyptian president and the UAE president is the strongest connecting link between the two nations. This deployment, it was a direct, personal reassurance from Egypt to the UAE, a way of saying, hey, our alliance is rock solid no matter how the threat landscape evolves.
But here's the crucial point: the sheer scale of this operation. High-level sources report that Egypt actually deployed military assets to 4 distinct Gulf nations. We're talking the UAE, Qatar, Kuwait, and Saudi Arabia. And honestly, the most shocking part of this whole thing? They did it at the very start of the recent conflicts, completely unprompted. The Gulf nations didn't even have to pick up the phone and formally request help. The Egyptian military just arrived to provide that shield.
That brings us to Section 3, defenses, specifically the Rafales and the Amon systems. It's really fascinating to look at the exact hardware Egypt brought to the table to protect critical Gulf infrastructure.
Because it's not just fighter jets. Egypt possesses a massive arsenal of 70 Skyguard Amon air defense systems. These are highly capable, short-range air defenders. And get this, Egypt didn't just send over their old stock to the Gulf, they deployed their absolute best units.
Right, so these aren't legacy systems collecting dust. The units they deployed have actually received extensive upgrades from the American defense contractor Raytheon. We're talking extended radar ranges, highly advanced targeting capabilities, upgraded machine guns, and next-generation missiles. The so what here is that these systems are specifically designed to counter modern, low-flying aerial threats, things like drones. This makes them absolutely perfect for defending critical Gulf infrastructure.
Okay, Section 4, Bahrain's situation. Because as we look at the broader map of these Egyptian deployments, there is one nation that stands out as a glaring exception.
While the UAE, Qatar, Saudi Arabia, and Kuwait all received these unprompted Egyptian forces, Bahrain is operating under a completely different security umbrella. They rely primarily on the Gulf Zone Peninsula Shield Force, which is a joint military venture of Gulf states, rather than bringing in Egyptian troops. So why the difference? Well, it comes down to Bahrain's highly specific threat profile.
You see, the primary threat in Bahrain isn't really an external aerial bombardment. It's the intense risk of Iran-backed internal unrest. Just recently, Bahrain's Interior Ministry dismantled a major espionage cell. They arrested 41 individuals tied to Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps and the Wilayat al-Faqih ideology. Because this threat is so heavily internal and demographic, bringing in external Egyptian deployments just isn't the right tool for the job. Local Gulf forces are far better suited to manage that kind of situation.
Let's transition to Section 5, the doctrine. We'll see how all of this builds into the overarching philosophy that guides Egypt's foreign military policy.
Everything we've discussed so far is driven by one core concept, Masafat al-Sikka. This translates to the distance of the journey. Now, President Sisi used this catchphrase about 12 years ago, but as this explainer clearly shows, it wasn't just empty political talk. It's a fully realized military doctrine. It literally means the only thing separating the Gulf from Egyptian military support is the physical time it takes to travel there. The second a threat emerges, Egypt will show up.
And Egypt insists this commitment is absolute. They view Gulf security as a direct extension of Egyptian national security, an indivisible whole. It's also super important to note here that intelligence sources emphasize this military commitment is based strictly on mutual survival and regional stability. It is completely independent of whether the Gulf decides to pour economic investments into Egypt or not.
Now, the BBC brought up a genuinely fascinating legal question about all this. Is it even constitutional? Under Article 152 of the Egyptian Constitution, the president actually needs parliamentary approval to declare an offensive war. But because these deployments are strictly classified as defensive alliances meant to protect Gulf borders, they neatly bypass the need for any public parliamentary debate. They aren't going on the offense, they're acting as a defensive shield. Finally, we reach Section 6, Perception versus Reality. We absolutely have to unpack the massive gap between what the Egyptian public feels right now and what their government is quietly executing behind closed doors. If you look at the streets, there's actually broad Egyptian public sympathy for Iran. But sources clarify this isn't some deep ideological alignment with Iran. It's driven almost entirely by a deep-seated anti-Israel sentiment regarding the ongoing conflicts. Basically, the public is rooting for anyone opposing Israel. The government's reality, however, is a totally different story. Through back channels, the Egyptian government is constantly reassuring its Gulf allies that Egypt remains a steadfast, reliable shield against any kind of Iranian regional expansion. And man, that back channel assurance is vital right now. Israeli intelligence has signaled a 24-hour threat window. They estimate they could escalate and severely strike Iranian energy infrastructure with almost no warning. If that happens, the immediate fear is that Iran would retaliate by targeting critical, highly vulnerable Gulf infrastructure. We're talking specifically about their water desalination facilities and their power plants. This is exactly why those Egyptian Skyguard systems and Rafale jets are sitting there on high alert right now. So, I'm going to leave you with this provocative thought. As the drums of a wider conflict beat faster, and the threat of targeted infrastructure strikes looms, will this unprecedented, unprompted Egyptian deployment actually be enough to deter a regional catastrophe, or is it simply the opening move of one? Thanks for joining this explainer. Keep analyzing the data, and we'll see you next time.